Hey guys, welcome. Today I'm going to quickly show you how to set up a 2D melee attack in Unity. You'll be able to hit multiple enemies at once, so you'll be able to explicitly control when your player deals damage, so you can activate it at the right time based on your attack animation. So what we're starting out with is a very basic scene here. We've got a simple movement script happening and the player can jump, and that is all. So there's nothing too complicated happening under the hood here. And by the way, all the assets you see in this video are available for you to download for free. They are our gift to you. You can use them personally or for commercial purposes. That is totally up to you. I'll leave a link down below in the description. Okay, so first I'm just going to get some enemies into the scene, and if you downloaded our assets, you can find them in the tutorial asset pack, and you can go into enemies, and let's drag in enemy 2. Although before we do that, go down to character rig and make sure that your pivot point is set to center. Right click, go to prefab and unpack so it's not a prefab anymore. And just for testing purposes as well, I'd like to bring in this spider, although it includes a web, which I don't want. So I'm actually going to create a new empty, call it spider, reset the transform, and I'm going to bring in the body as well as the legs. And I'm going to set him right down here. And I'm going to select both parts of him and up his order and layer to something high like 8. So we're going to set up 2 health scripts, one for the enemy and one for the spider, and we'll get that set up very fast. Go into your scripts folder, right click, create a new folder called enemies. Go in there, create a new C# script, call it enemy health. Click on enemy 2, let's just name him enemy, and let's drag the enemy health script on there. Let's also give him a box collider 2D. Expand that till you're happy. We'll set that to trigger. And let's also go back into our scripts folder, create a new folder called environment. Go in there. Let's create a new C# script called spider health. Let's drag that onto the spider game object. And let's add a capsule collider to that. And we'll position that like so and make it a trigger. So you might have multiple things in your scene that you want to be able to damage. So we're going to set it up so that you are able to do that. Let's open up enemy health. Let's get rid of this startup stuff. I'm going to serialize the field private float max health. Let's default that to 3 and create a private float current health. In your start function, let's set the current health to be equal to the max health. And let's copy all that, and we'll paste that into our spider health as well. Except we'll give the spider a default health value of 1. So right away, let's get the code set up, and then we will animate in attack. So click on your player, go down to the bottom, and let's create a script called player attack. Let's go to our root assets and move that into the scripts folder and move that into the player folder. Let's open that up. Let's get rid of all this startup stuff. And actually, before we set up this, let's set up the controls really quick. And let's go to our controls, input actions, and let's add a new action map called attack. Let's rename this to attack as well. Let's change the action type to pass through. Control type of button should be just fine. And let's click here and add a binding. On this one, we'll click on path and listen. I'm going to set it to the left control button and add that to my keyboard control scheme. And for my gamepad, I'm going to go here and I'm going to add the west button and add that to my gamepad control scheme. Save your asset. So right away, back in our player attack, let's add an update function. And let's say if user input.instance.controls.attack.was pressed this frame, then we're going to perform some sort of attack. So let's create an attack function. So we are going to do this with a circle cast all, and that is essentially a raycast. So in order to properly set that up, we're going to need to declare a raycast hit 2D, and we'll make that an array in case it hits multiple things, and we'll call it hits. So down in our attack function, hits is going to equal physics2d.circlecastAll. So there are a few variables we're going to need to set up. We want an origin and a radius and a layer mask as well. So let's go up to the top here. We'll serialize the field private of type transform, attack transform. That'll handle the origin. Let's get the radius next. That'll be serialized field private float attack range. We'll default that to 1.5. And finally, for the layer mask, we are going to set up serialized field private layer mask called attackable layer. So now we can come back here. For the origin, we're going to plug in our attack transform dot position. The radius is going to be our attack range. The direction is going to be transform dot right. And once a distance, we'll plug in 0. And the layer mask, we will add attackable layer. Okay, so we have sent out our invisible circle, and now we need to do something with the results. Let's create a for loop. So we'll change that to I is less than hits.length. This is an attack function, right? So normally what you would do is you would say maybe enemy health called enemy health equals hits of the current index dot collider dot game object dot get component enemy health, right? And then if the enemy health does not equal null, then we'll call some sort of damage function. But we set this up with only the enemy having the enemy health script, but the spider has this spider health script. So how are we going to handle that? Well, first, let's go into the scripts folder, create a new folder called interface. Go in there, create a new C# script called iDamageable. Open that up. Okay, you can get rid of all this startup stuff here, and you can actually get rid of the mono behavior and the colon up here as well. This is not going to be a class, this is an interface. And so we need to add some sort of method, but without any actual code. It's just going to be an empty method. So let's set up a public void damage, and let's pass in a float damage amount. So this is going to be fine just like this. And this is really cool how this works. So before we can finish up our player attack, what we're going to do is go into our enemy health script, and beside mono behavior, add a comma and add iDamageable. So once that takes a second to compile, it's going to give you an error. And that is because you are not implementing the interface right now. And what that means is whenever you create an interface and you add it, right, to this script here, it requires you to have this method included in this script, or it's going to give you an error every single time. You have to include it. Okay, so we can actually right click that, go to quick actions and implement interface. It'll generate that for you. We can just get rid of this here. Actually like this down below. Now, since we're here, let's go ahead and do the normal damage function stuff. Current health is going to be equal to minus equal damage amount. And if the current health reaches less than or equal to 0, well, then we'll call some sort of die function, which we'll create right now. We'll keep this nice and simple, and we'll just destroy the game object so that we know it works. And if we add iDamageable to our spider health as well, it's going to be the exact same thing. We have to implement the interface. So let's actually copy and paste these two functions from enemy health and put them into spider health. Perfect. Now back in our player attack script, let's get rid of all of this. Instead of looking for enemy health, what we are going to find is iDamageable. We'll call it iDamageable equals hits of the current index dot collider dot game object dot get component iDamageable. So now we can say if iDamageable does not equal null, meaning it did find an iDamageable, then we'll call some sort of function to apply damage, right? iDamageable dot damage, and it wants a damage amount. Let's go ahead and create that up here. Serialize field, private float damage amount. Let's default that to 1 and plug that in down here. And before we go ahead and test this, I would like to make this visual in the scene, because circle cast all, it's just like a raycast, it's invisible, and I would like to be able to see it so that we know for sure when it's working. So let's create private void on draw gizmos selected. We'll say gizmos.draw wire sphere. It wants a center. We can say attack transform dot position, and the radius can be the attack range. All right, so back in Unity, we have a few things to set up so that we can fill all of this out. We need an attack transform on the player. Let's open him up, create a new empty called attack transform. Move that forward just a little bit and plug that in down here. Let's leave the attack range at 1.5. The attackable layer, we need to set up a new layer. Go up here to layer, click add layer. Let's call it attackable. And let's go to enemy and change their layer to attackable. Yes, change children. Same with the spider. And back to player, attackable layer is attackable. Now in the scene view, you can see this circle here, and that represents our damage zone. So I'm still going to keep that at 1.5, and obviously that's not going to work unless we actually call the attack function. There we go. All right, let's test this. So as long as the enemy's collider is within this damage zone, it should be working. Actually, you can click on enemy here, and if you change this to debug mode, you can actually see even private variables. So his health is at 2, 1, and now he's dead. Great, so that is working. And we could leave this here, but there are a few limitations to doing it this way. We are literally only running this for 1 frame, which is the instant that the attack button is pressed. And I would like to change that so that we have a little bit more control over how long we're attacking for and when we actually start attacking. But first, before we get into that, let's set up the actual attack animation. Click on player, go to your animation window, click here, and let's create a new clip called attack. So let's go ahead and start by adding a property. We'll go to body, down to scythe, and add the transform rotation. Get rid of these keyframes at the 1 second mark. So straight off the bat on frame 0, I would like to move the scythe forward a bit and also rotate it forward just a bit. And I would also like his feet spread apart. And I'm going to undo that because I was not recording. Make sure you hit the record button. Great, so let's go to frame 3. So we're going to rotate the scythe all the way down to the floor. We're also going to rotate the head down a little bit as well. And we're going to put his feet back together. Okay, let's copy all of these keyframes at frame 0 and paste them into frame 1. So I would like everything to sit still except for the scythe between 0 and 1. So let's get rid of this scythe rotation keyframe. So his scythe starts going down and then the rest of him follows. Let's add a property. Go to body, transform scale, go back to frame 1 and click add keyframes. And now back on frame 3, let's squash the body a little bit. Now I'm actually going to adjust the animation so that the scythe follows this circle a little bit better. You can also resize the circle too. And let's copy the keyframes at 0 and paste them to frame 5. Doesn't have to be perfect, but pretty good. We'll be fine. All right, let's get all of that hooked up in the animator window. So we want to transition from any state to attack and then from attack back to idle. So we're going to set up a trigger called attack. Let's right click and create a transition from any state to attack. And if you bring this up to the top, when you click here, it'll be the first one selected. So the condition is attack. Make sure has exit time is not selected and change transition duration to 0. And let's make a transition from attack back to idle. This is going to be has exit time and change duration to 0. Meaning when we set this trigger with code, the attack animation will play and then it'll finish and then it'll go back to idle. So now let's go back to our player script. Let's grab a reference to the animator. Private animator, call it anim. Let's get that component in start. And let's set that trigger right below our attack function here. So anim.set trigger attack. Let's make sure that's working okay. Awesome. Now, one thing you might notice is that you can really spam this attack. Like the faster you press, the more he'll attack. So I would like to set up some sort of maximum amount of time that you have to wait before you can attack again. So back in our player attack script, let's add a serialized field, private float, time between attacks. Let's default that to 0.15. And let's also set up a private float called attack time counter. So in the update function, first we need to update that counter every frame. So attack time counter plus equals time.delta time. And then up here, if we press the attack button and our attack time counter is greater than or equal to our time between attacks, then we are able to attack. So at that point, let's reset the counter by setting it to 0. Let's make sure that's working by going down to player. Let's change this to something high, like 1 second. And now you can see he's only attacking every 1 second. And actually, in our start function, let's also set the attack time counter equal to time between attacks. That'll just make sure that if you have your attack time counter set to something high, that as soon as you start the game, you are able to attack. Awesome. So I mentioned that we are going to set this up in a totally different way. So actually, this is not what we want. This was just a good example to show you how you can set it up. Let's comment this out. We'll be able to reuse a lot of this though, but for now, we are going to set up a public enumerator called damage while slash is active. And an IEnumerator, that is a coroutine. A coroutine will allow you to do things within a certain amount of time. So this will allow us to explicitly control when we can damage enemies and when we can't. So first, let's copy and paste all of this. And now to set this up, let's create a public bool called should be damaging. And let's give that a public getter and a private setter and default it to false. All this means here is you can control where you were able to get it from, and you can control whether or not you can set the bool, meaning change it to true or false, private, meaning within only this script, or public, meaning you can do it from another script. So this is a public get and a private set. We commented out the attack function, so let's comment that out as well over here. And now down here at the very top, we can say while should be damaging. And let's put all of this inside of that. And actually, if you highlight it and you hold the Alt key and then press up on your keyboard, you can just move it like that and tab it over. And before we forget, after the for loop, let's say yield return null. This means this is going to run every frame for as many frames as this value is true. So we're definitely going to need to set this to false somewhere, or this is just going to run forever. And yield return null, that essentially means wait one more frame. So if you forget to put this after your for loop, then your game will actually freeze. So don't forget that. That's very important. Now the thing is, we actually defaulted it to false. So right up here, we're actually going to change this should be damaging to be true right there. So it definitely will run, and it'll keep running until we set it false. And we are going to do that in an animation event. And this will be real easy. Let's go down to the bottom. Let's create a new region called animation triggers and hashtag end region. Let's create a public void should be damaging to true. And another public void should be damaging to false. And in here, I'm actually not going to use this here, but we'll leave that there in case you want to do something with it. And creating a region just allows you to minimize all of your function within that region. So we're getting close. Now, this actually is not being called anywhere, but we are going to call it in our animation event. Click your player, go to animation, select the attack animation. And I would like to call it right here at the start of the attack, not at frame 0, right at frame 1. So click here to add animation event and find damage while slash is active. And then I would like to stop looking for targets to damage right here at the bottom when he's done slashing. So let's add another animation event, should be damaging to false. Let's test that. All right, so this is really cool. We're able to control when we're doing damage, but we have a problem. He's now killing them in one hit. And that's literally because we are running this every single frame, and we are running it for 1, 2, 3 frames. So it's actually damaging him 3 times and killing him right away. So what can we do about this? Well, we're actually going to open up our iDamageable function again. This is going to help us out again, and create a public bool has taken damage. This is going to be a public get and a public set. So as soon as we add something to our interface, it's going to give us errors because we're now not implementing that interface in either of our scripts. So let's do that really quick. Right click and implement. Let's get rid of all this garbage here. Get set. I'm just going to copy and paste that into enemy health. So obviously we have taken damage in our damage function. So let's add that right at the start in enemy health and spider health. Okay, so back in our player attack, what we can do now is if iDamageable is not equal null and iDamageable.has taken damage is equal to false, then we'll actually apply the damage. Now it'll default to false right away. If you don't actually say anything, it's just going to automatically go to false. So this will work for one attack, but then we turn it to true and we don't ever turn it false again. So let's fix that. And we could be hitting any number of objects and we don't know what we're hitting. So how are we going to handle this? What we're going to do is we're going to generate a list of everything that we hit. So let's go back to the top and we're going to create a private list of type iDamageable. Call it iDamageables equals new list iDamageable. So right now we have an empty list of iDamageables. Let's make sure that we add things to this list as we find things. So down here, it obviously found something because we are trying to apply damage. So we are also going to iDamageables.add. And what are we going to add? Our iDamageable. So no matter how many objects we're hitting, we are adding each one of them individually into this list of iDamageables. And then at the very end, we'll call some sort of function. Let's call it return attackables to damageable or something like that. All right, so we just created that right here. And so what we are going to do is a for each loop. So for each, what kind of variable is it? It's I damageable. What are we going to call it? Thing that was damaged. In what's the collection? I damageables. So for each of those in this, we will thing that was damaged dot has taken damage is equal to false. So it will go through every single item that we added to that list and make that bool false again. And then after that's finished running, idamageables dot clear will clear out that list. Let's test that. Time between attacks of 1 second is pretty lame. I'm going to put that back to 0.15 and add a few more enemies into the scene just to be sure. Boom, it got all of them. That is fantastic. And that's all I got for you guys. Thank you so much for watching this tutorial. If you have any ideas for future tutorials that you would like me to make, please let me know in the comments down below. See ya.